very pleased and honored to host the message that these guys are delivering today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over our two fine leaders, Governor Sanford and Senator Jim DeMint.
Go ahead, Jim.
Now, Governor, now they told me you were going first. So,
you want to go? It doesn't matter to me at all.
That way I could just fill in the, correct the thing.
What do y'all feel comfortable with? Who you want to go first? I'm in Greenville territory, though. It's your neck of the woods. It's our neck of the woods. Well, then let me, if I'm going to go first, let me grab that. Okay. I'd say first off, well, no, I can hold it. Thank you for letting us come by. We sure appreciate it. What you see here is amazing new technology that Jim and I were just learning about, being applied in a very different way with real-world applications that can make a difference in people's lives. And this notion of innovation, of different ways of skinning the cat, is incredibly important to enhancing and making real the American dream. So thanks for what you're doing.
Absolutely.
It seems to me that a big part of what he and his team are able to do, though, is predicated on a business environment that works. And what strikes me, and I think what strikes Jim, is how oftentimes there is a disconnect between the thrift, the ingenuity that you see at the private sector level, and at times what you see at the governmental level. And one of the fights that Jim and I are both engaged in as we go through the appropriations process is indeed how much are we going to be spending, whether in Washington or whether in Columbia. And there are really remarkable parallels, because what we're dealing with right now, there's a national debt clock, but we created a state debt clock to talk about the $1.3 billion of new money that's projected to come into Columbia, South Carolina, and how it's going to be spent. And what we're really talking about, whether in Washington or whether in Columbia, is this simple notion of priorities. To make this business a success, and it's the front end of getting started, you have to set priorities in a very deliberate fashion. And so, for instance, at the national level, I saw there with the NASA budget, there'd been a cut to NASA, and one of the programs they have actually did research, basically tracked, if you will, the possibility of an asteroid hitting the world. If one of these asteroids hit the world, it could take out basically geography the size of New Jersey. Now, the same kind of money went into a teapot museum in North Carolina. And you'd say, if you're just a casual observer, what's more important, avoiding an asteroid taking out New Jersey or a teapot museum in North Carolina? And we're dealing with a lot of the same sort of teapot phenomenons in South Carolina, whether it's a bean museum that we've talked about down in Lake City, or a whole host of other programs that don't fit with what we think have to be the top level priorities to indeed have a strong business playing field for this business, or frankly many others like it. I'd say as well, what Jim and I are both struggling with is this larger notion of defining functions of government. You can't be all things to all people in life, in business, or for that matter in government. And increasingly there's a lot of bracket creep wherein things that are done at the federal level frankly could be well done at the state or the local level, and things that are done at state level could be well done at the local level. And I think that notion of defining what government does, what service, is very, very important if we're going to avoid this bracket creep. And lastly, what we're really talking about here is simple overspending. $1.3 billion represents more than 10% growth in government this year. And our point has been that government ought to grow, but it shouldn't grow faster than the growth of people's pocketbooks and wallets in South Carolina. And what we see here with this number is, in fact, government growing at a faster rate than the underlying economy, which is not sustainable. If you look at these numbers, what they amount to is about double the southeastern average of what other states have grown at. If you look over the last 4 years, state government has grown by about 40%. And the question I would ask is, has your paycheck or your wallet grown by 40% over the last 4 years? And if it hadn't, then why should government grow at a faster rate? Because again, to keep government sustainable, whether at the federal level or state level, you got to grow roughly at the rate of your economy. If not, you set yourself up for a fall. And I think what has been so powerful about what Jim has said in Washington is watch out. We could be setting ourselves up for a fall. You got David Walker, the Comptroller General of the United States of America, going around on what's called his fiscal wake-up tour, talking about we could be setting ourselves up for a fall. And what we're arguing for at the state level as well is saying let's avoid that fall. We saw it in the late 1990s and the early 2000s when we grew government by 25% and then got ahead of ourselves and went over the cliff. If we don't watch out, in South Carolina, we will see the same mid-year level budget cuts that are harmful to the taxpayer and harmful to people who need government services the most. That's ultimately what today is about from our end. I again applaud the work that Jim's doing as a South Carolinian. I appreciate his work up in Washington in watching out for my money because I can't, well, if you think about everybody's paycheck, the big chunk that gets shaved off goes to Washington. I appreciate the job you're doing up there.
Thank you,
anyway.
Mark.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thanks. The governor and I are here today to try to enlist the support of the people of South Carolina in improving their quality of life, raising their family incomes, improving job security, doing things that make the state and the country more prosperous. Sometimes we don't connect the dots between what the government does and what happens to the rest of us in the private sector and our families. And that's really what we're trying to do today, because every time the government spends more money and raises more taxes, it pulls money out of companies like this many times that are innovating and helping to create a better future, create better jobs. You know, this is a textile company. Right. Textile company. We've been talking about losing textile jobs for years. And government can play a role in innovation. And they know it here at this company because they have gotten federal money. But they got it in a way that it should work. Federal grants, competitive grants, and this is one of the smaller applications. And you've been through dozens of them.
That's right.
Some you get and some you don't. There's a federal pot of money for innovation, encouraging things like this to happen, replace old economies with new economies. But to get an earmark, you just go to the website of a South Carolina congressman, fill out a few pages, or you hire a lobbyist. A lot of you don't know that most, or a lot of municipalities, small municipalities in this state, little colleges and universities, they're paying lobbyists over $100,000 a year to come to Washington in hopes that they'll hit the jackpot and get an earmark. And it doesn't have anything to do with merit. A lot of times it has to do with whether or not this lobbyist knows this staff or this chairman. Back in 1991, there were about 500 earmarks in government right before you got there. And Governor Sanford was one of the first to start sounding the alarm that this was going in the wrong direction, and he's proved to be right. Our discretionary federal budget was about $500 billion at that time, with about 500 earmarks in the total appropriation process. In 2005, appropriations earmarks got to about 14,000, and the discretionary budget had doubled to about $1 trillion. There is a connection, and I want to make sure that all of you in the media understand what we're talking about when we're talking about earmarks. Instead of a competitive merit-based process where people apply and we have peer review, we have boards that are set up of people from the private sector and universities who review these to make sure that the money is well spent. They have to be accountable to how it's spent and often have to match it with a lot of private money, which keeps them accountable. What happens every year in Washington, what has been happening until this year, is the appropriation chairman basically says, DeMint, what do you want? You need to vote for my $300 million bridge to nowhere, and we're going to get you $100,000 for your little sewer project there in Simpsonville. That's how it works. It's a snowballing process. And Republicans played this game worse than the Democrats. And earmarks grew, waste grew. But if you can look at the process for a minute, the incentive to spend more money in government, it is increased exponentially if everybody has a stake in getting that budget up so they can get another earmark back in their congressional district or their state.